My parents adopted a new baby. He was ruining my life. Mom and Dad had been hinting at a surprise for weeks. Something special. Something big. Something that'll make all our lives better, Dad said. I hoped for a family vacation, or maybe a swimming pool. Instead, I got a brother. His name was Ian. Only 8 months old. Dark hair, little eyes even darker. They'd adopted him through the same agency they'd used to adopt me. I hated him. We had to share a bedroom. Soon, half of my stuff was boxed up in the attic to make room for a crib. He wasn't much fun either. He screamed whenever I touched him. But no matter how much he wailed and fussed, Mom and Dad were wrapped around his chubby little finger. A new baby is a big adjustment, Mom said when I complained, so we all have to be patient and work together. I tried. I really did, but they couldn't see what I saw. I began noticing things within a few months of Ian living with us. Strange things. Like how Ian's cry never seemed to reach his eyes. I can't recall a single tear ever wetting his cheeks. Almost as if it was all for show. And he was strong enough to pull out a handful of my hair when I tried to give him a bath, howling all the while. I tried telling Mom and Dad that he was weird, but they chalked it up to jealousy. Their lives now revolved around Ian, with little time left for me. I finally discovered why late one night. I awoke at about 3 a.m. I glanced at Ian's crib, only to find it empty. I almost cried out for my parents, but the sound of their bedroom door creaking open stopped me. I poked my head around the corner, where I saw it. Ian, his head split open like a blooming flower. He sat atop my father's chest, his limbs jutting crookedly from his body. His tongue, now a long, wet rope of flesh, reached down my father's throat. He was feeding on them. I crept back to my bed, unsure of what to do. Until the next evening. Mom and Dad needed a break. They decided I was old enough to babysit while they went to dinner in town. Once we were alone, I laid Ian in his crib. His little black eyes looked surprised when I laid the pillow over his face. It took a long time for him to stop kicking. When it was done, I called Dad, putting on my best frantic voice as I told him Ian wasn't breathing. Mom and Dad were devastated. At the funeral, they both held me tight, sobbing that they were sorry. As I hugged them back, I almost pitied them. They didn't know what Ian was. They didn't know what I was. They didn't know that I'd been starving while Ian gorged. And they didn't know that I don't like to share. Stories number 2, is it really so bad to lie to your wife? Sometimes, you need to lie. My wife lifted her shirt, and showed me the scaly rash engulfing her stomach. Do I need to go to acute care? No matter what, I couldn't let her go to the hospital. They probably just changed the laundry detergent ingredients. You'll be fine, babe, I lied. You sure? This morning it was barely pink. If tomorrow it's worse, I'll take you to acute care. I'm sure it's nothing. Besides, I have a surprise for you. I led her to the basement where I'd set up her Nintendo Switch on the big screen. I'd lit every candle I could find for mood lighting. There was a bowl of her favorite seltzers on ice, just what I could get from the fridge. I couldn't go to the store. They were all closed. What's all this? She asked. I turned the TV on and revealed the home screen of Stardew Valley. Thank God she had the cartridge. I had already trashed the Wi-Fi router. I want to watch you play, she laughed. What? You hate this game. I never said I hate it. You did. I did. No, I lied, I said it wasn't for me. You need to finish the community center. I know you've been so busy at work, why don't you finish it tonight? I want to watch it. That might take a few hours. Awesome. I'm excited. Stardew Valley was my wife's favorite game in the world. She played for 2 hours before she asked if I'd seen her phone. No matter what, I couldn't let her use her phone. I'm really sorry, babe. I broke your phone. What? I lost mine, so I was using yours and I broke it. I promise I'll get us new ones in the morning. She wanted to be mad. But I made a peace offering. I brought her the bottle of wine I was saving for our anniversary. We laughed, drank. She finished the community center. The wine caught up. As she laid down, she told me she felt weak. That's just the wine, I lied. I brought you a glass of water. With the crushed ice in your favorite cup and the straw you like. I told her, you are my entire world. I love you. That was the truth. She said she loved me too. No matter what, I couldn't let her know. If she had left the house, used her phone, she would have seen the warnings they released today. The head of the CDC called it a world killer. Some mutation of a mutation of EEE. The incubation period was 6 months. 6 horrible months where the virus was extremely contagious, airborne, and asymptomatic. They estimated 96% of the world was already infected. After 6 months, a rash appeared on your stomach. Then it got worse. Then within 24 hours your brain swelled, and you died. My wife will be dead by morning. She deserved one last nice night. I kissed her fevered forehead. Stories number 3. For a price, I can take your guilt. What I do with it is my business. Go over it with me one more time, I said, in my gentlest voice. Today's client was an 11-year-old boy. It happened a year ago. We were on our way to the movies. We only went because I begged my mom to take me. A man ran a red light and he couldn't go on. I knew enough. Slowly, I took his hand in mine. A sob hitched in his throat as I asked him to close his eyes. Then I began the treatment. I could see it all. Feel it all. Twisted metal and gasoline. Screeching tires and a child begging mama to wake up. And guilt, fathomless and unceasing. The blackness of his soul poured into me, filling my stomach, shriveling my veins. It was electric, sickening, soul-shattering, but I drank it all down like wine. His father paid well, but the smile that bloomed across his face was the real reward. Another satisfied customer. My own father always hated me for my gift. He said I was a freak, and that the world was better off without people like me. For years, he tried to make me normal, mainly with his fist. I finally left home at 16 and never looked back. In nearly 20 years, I've absorbed the guilt of thousands, from soldiers to CEOs, and business never stops booming. I was about to leave the office for the day when my secretary stopped me. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked. She could see that I was pale, that the dark circles under my eyes never faded. "Fit as a fiddle," I joked. She looked worried. "Sir, the guilt you take from clients," she said, as I turned for the door, "where does it all go?" I swallowed the bile at the back of my throat and simply smiled. She wouldn't like the answer. The drive up to the house was surreal. Same driveway. Same trees. But the gray-haired man at the door looked different than I remembered. "What do you want?" he barked. "Hi, Dad." His look of annoyed suspicion soured into hate when he recognized me. 20 years and you show your face now? What makes you think you're welcome here? Unrepentant. He hadn't changed one bit. "I actually wanted to give you something," I said, "for old time's sake." "I don't want it. You're no son of mine." He made to slam the door in my face, but I was faster. I grabbed him, pulling his face inches from my own. And I let it out. A putrid black torrent of the guilt of 1,000 strangers flowed from my mouth and down his throat. Nearly 20 years of binging had all led to this one great purge. When it was done, he collapsed to the floor, finally feeling the guilt he never felt for me. And I experienced a relief unlike anything I'd ever felt before. I was grinning ear to ear as I laid the pistol at his feet. Stories number 4. I became friends with the quiet kid at school. He warned me to stay home from school one day. We called him Charlie Longneck. He was the bottom of Rockmont High's social hierarchy. Everyone knew him, but no one noticed him. He was always just sorta there. Too lame for the stoners. Too weird for the nerds. First to get beat up by jocks and last to get picked for dodgeball. He was a pale, gangly mess of a kid, like he was made of wire. His large head sat atop a skinny neck that seemed about 3 inches too long. And he was quiet, uncomfortably quiet. He'd speak when called on in class, but that's about it. The rest of the time, he just stared with his big, watery eyes. And he was my best friend. He kinda just started following me around one day. It was weird at first, but he didn't bother me at all. Just seemed happy to sit with me at lunch or listen to me vent. Eventually, I began enjoying the company. I could tell he enjoyed it too. After a few months of this, he even began to talk to me. I've been watching for years. Observing. I still don't understand. Understand what? I asked, puzzled. The other kids, he asked, his voice a nasally trill, why don't they like me? People can be assholes, Charlie. They don't like things that are different. Why not? I shrugged. Humans can be animals like that. He put his long, thin fingers together, as if deep in thought. Animals, yes. I didn't know why, but something about his big hands and dinner plate eyes made me nervous. I put it out of my mind. Until the following week. Charlie and I were in the cafeteria. He was showing me his science project. He called it a star map. It was a big grid laid out with the names of stars and galaxies and stuff. Whatever it was important to him. And then Kevin Lackey, dickhead extraordinaire, walked over and dumped a carton of milk on it. His other asshole friends cheered him on. Charlie's project was ruined, the ink running with spilled milk off the table. I tried to comfort him, but he didn't seem angry. He looked relieved, like he'd finally made up his mind about something. Don't come to school tomorrow, he said, as we mopped up the mess, you're a good friend. I convinced myself that he was joking. Charlie was weird, but he was harmless. I told him that if I stayed home, he was staying home too. It was the only time I ever saw him smile. I told my mom I was sick that night, and planned on texting Charlie in the morning. When my mom woke me up with urgent news about the school, I feared the worst. I turned on the TV, expecting blood in the hallways. Bodies on the ground. Instead, I saw a newsreel of a blinding light, cascading from the sky. Rockmont High School, and everyone in it, had vanished without a trace. Stories number 5, Breaking News. Good morning, I'm Danielle Hawkins. We interrupt your regular programming to bring you breaking news. Danielle's voice, usually steady and commanding, wavered slightly as she glanced at the teleprompter. She knew her job demanded composure, especially in moments of chaos, but something about this report felt off, like a distant hum of dread vibrating in her chest. There is an active shooter situation at Westbrook High School. Police are advising residents to stay clear of the area while students and faculty are evacuated. Early reports suggest multiple casualties. The words felt cold, mechanical. As she spoke, the producer's voice crackled in her earpiece. Danielle, we're getting a name on the suspect. Stand by. She nodded subtly, maintaining her on-camera poise. Her mind raced. Westbrook. That was where Matthew went. She forced herself to breathe deeply. It couldn't be him. The producer's voice returned, sharp and urgent. The shooter has been identified as Matthew Hawkins. 15 years old. Danielle froze. The teleprompter kept rolling, oblivious to the storm breaking behind her carefully composed expression. The edges of the studio seemed to blur as her producer's words echoed in her mind. Matthew. Your son. Matthew. She was live. Millions of people were watching. The silence stretched just a second too long before she forced herself to continue. Her voice cracked as she said it aloud, sealing it into reality. The suspect has been identified as my son, Matthew Hawkins. The words fell heavy and lifeless, like stones sinking into dark water. Her co-anchor, visibly startled, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The newsroom, typically bustling with energy, was now deathly quiet, save for the faint hum of monitors. Danielle's hands trembled under the desk, but she kept speaking, clinging to her training like a lifeline. Matthew is a sophomore at Westbrook. He struggles, but I never. Her voice faltered, breaking completely. The producer cut to a live feed from the scene, sparing Danielle the need to continue. She barely noticed as the camera moved off her, the weight of the truth crushing her chest. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A text message. She stared at the screen. "Mom, I'm sorry." Her world splintered. Stories number 6. I befriended my husband's mistress. Dark hair, blue eyes, average height, curvy. I wasn't surprised that was what she looked like, since that has always been my husband's type. I could admit she was gorgeous. When I first spotted her on the camera footage, she even took my breath away. I could understand why my husband had an attraction to her, I just couldn't figure out what she offered that I didn't. I already had an inkling that my husband was having an affair. His attentiveness started dwindling. Stopped giving me kisses goodbye. Now, it's like he doesn't even want to touch me. So, I hid a camera in his car and left for a weekend trip. Not even an hour after I had left, he pulled up to an apartment, and there she was greeting him at the door. Sure, she was breathtakingly beautiful, but what did she offer that I couldn't? I had a wild phase in college before I met my husband, but I've cleaned up my act. I tidied up while he worked, cooked every night, and gave my husband all the affection he asked for. She wasn't hard to find. I only needed to scroll halfway through my husband's Facebook friend list to find her. Amanda Day. 32, born and raised in California. Works as a real estate agent. Seemed to make good money. No kids and 2 dogs. Attends spin classes on the weekends, explains her perfect figure. Likes to go wine tasting with her friends. 2 weeks later I found myself in one of her spin classes. My curiosity got the best of me, but I needed to know what made her so different from me. I needed to know what my husband saw in her. She was frustratingly friendly. Annoyingly charming. Even more beautiful in person. We hit it off immediately. I don't even know what my end game was. Over the next few weeks, I'd go to classes with her, and we'd meet for lunch after. Then, she started inviting me over on Fridays for wine night. We'd spend the evening on her couch giggling and gossiping. It went on like this for months. I decided to confront my husband. That night, he gulped down his wine with dinner, and I watched, waiting. "You don't look like you're feeling so well, dear." 2 hours later he was finally awake. I pressed the gun to his cheek. "Don't lie, I know about your mistress." He laughed. "What are you going to do, kill me if I don't break up with her?" "No, I don't want you anymore." "Great, leave me then, so I can be with her." "That's the thing. I need you out of the picture." I thought about those wine-filled nights with her. I thought about the way her breath caught when I accidentally brushed my hand on her leg. Or the way she looked at me with a hint of longing in her gaze. I don't want you anymore. I want her. Stories number 7. I'm a counselor at a battered women's shelter, and they call me Milford the Magician. For the last 30 years, I've bounced from one battered women's shelter to the next as a counselor. Judge me if you want to, but they give me exactly what I need. Sustenance. It's how I survive. When you couple a strong moral compass like mine and an appetite as extreme as mine, pickings can be slim. But those shelters have never let me down. They call me Milford the Magician down on 42nd because I work miracles. Susie is sitting with me. 32 and she's been beaten by the same man for 16 of them. She's been a hard one to crack. I finally get her to open up. Her high school sweetheart is quite the rascal. She would have been a mother twice now if the scamp hadn't been so rough with her. She lost both pregnancies. She came to the shelter straight from the hospital after the final bout. She's never going back, but all that pain is baggage that's going to follow her forever. I've finally got her trust. I can finally reach out and hold her hand. Her body goes rigid at my touch. She's not going to remember any of this. I take it all in. All the pain. I'm not proud, I find it delicious, but it's not the main course. When I get everything I need, I let go of her hand. Her eyes are different. They always are. There's a spark of life in them that hasn't been there in a long time. If the past is any indication, Susie will be gone within a week with a new lease on life without another thought of the man who stole everything from her. Her pain is mine. 2 nights later, I'm standing outside of Susie's old house. I don't look like Milford. I look like Susie. I knock and her husband opens the door. He lets me in. They always do. They're always so repentant when they think their girls came back home. Moron. As soon as the door is closed, I take him to the bathroom. I like doing it in front of the mirror. I have him take off his clothes and face his reflection. I put my hand on his shoulders and he goes rigid under my hands. He feels all the beatings he gave. He watches in panic as every bruise that he gave Susie appears. His arm breaks. His jaw cracks and goes crooked. 3 of his ribs break. So many injuries. So much pain. So delicious. I change. I'm not Susie anymore. I'm not Milford. I'm me. He sees me for what I am. He shits himself from the fear. It's how I cook dinner. Like a fly will vomit on what it's about to eat. Unless someone checks my toilet, they'll never find his body. I've had food all over the world, but nothing compares to the menus at the shelters. After 500 years, they've been the most guilt-free food source. Stories number 8. I ruined my sister's wedding, but she deserved it. What do you mean you've been sleeping with my boyfriend? I snapped. Was sleeping with him, my sister, Alice, corrected me. I broke it off with him months ago. Why are you telling me this now? Because I want to get married with a clear conscience, was her reply. Does that mean you told Brad? That was her fiancé's name. No, I haven't, she shook her head, and I'm not going to. Hearing her reply confirmed my suspicions that she was lying about her motivation for telling me. You're not trying to clear your conscience, I pointed an accusing finger at her, you just don't want me to be a part of the wedding. That's not it, she said unconvincingly. Whatever, I stormed out of her apartment, slamming the door behind me. The first thing I did after I left was confront my boyfriend. He tried to lie about the affair at first but changed his story once I told him that my sister had already confessed. He begged for forgiveness and tried to pin the blame on Alice, saying she was the one who initiated things, but I didn't care. It takes 2 to tango, was the last thing I said to him. The next week was a series of emotional highs and lows for me until I decided that I wasn't going to let my sister get away with what she'd done. After everything we'd been through over the years, she'd finally crossed a line and I was going to make sure she paid for it. Under the pretense of wanting to put things behind us, I reached out to Alice and invited her over to my apartment to make amends. When she got there, I told her that it was over between my boyfriend and me and that we should celebrate. She readily agreed and accepted the drug-laced drink I handed her. That was too easy, I said as I dragged her corpse into the bedroom where the body of my ex-boyfriend lay in a spreading pool of blood on the floor. Before I positioned her body on the bed, I swapped the clothes I was wearing with the clothes she was wearing. Since we were twins, nobody would be able to tell that it wasn't my body in the bed. Now that the scene was set, I went back to Alice's apartment to enact the rest of my plan. How was your sister? Brad asked when I walked through the door. I don't know, I replied, she never answered the door. That's weird, he replied, why did she invite you over if she wasn't going to be there? It is weird, I agreed, do you think I should call someone to check on her? I asked. Nah, he shook his head, you know how crazy she is. It's probably best to just forget about her. Yeah, I smiled, you're probably right. Stories number 9. My elderly neighbor insists she is pregnant. I spit out my coffee, thinking that it must have been a joke. But she stared at me with not even a hint of amusement on her face. Deb and her husband had mostly kept to themselves. But when her husband died 2 months ago, Deb started visiting often. Chuck and I were very physical, right up until he died, she winked. God sent me his child so he can continue to be with me. Haven't you gone through menopause? I know it is hard for you to understand, but this is the work of God. Chuck and I always wanted a child, but we could never get pregnant. It's a true miracle. I told myself that this was her way of coping, so I decided to play along. Then Deb started using her pregnancy to gain favors. She needed help with chores and errands because the pregnancy was draining her. I figured I was helping to ease some of her grief, but after a while, I knew she was taking advantage of me. One morning she came over at 5 a.m. Baby has me up early these days. I'm starving. Could you help me with breakfast? Enough, Deb. You're not pregnant. How dare you? You're wrong. 2 months passed before I ran into her again. My mouth dropped at the sight of her. Her previously loose-fitting cardigan could barely stretch around her stomach. When she saw me looking at her belly, she smirked. Told you I was pregnant. Chuck Jr. is growing at a healthy rate, no thanks to you. She must have stuffed her sweater with something. Can I feel? Keep your hands off of me. I laughed and walked away. Clearly, she didn't want me to feel whatever she had stuck under her clothes. 3 months later, she knocked on my door. I wanted to roll my eyes at the sight of her. Her pregnant belly had doubled in size. The doctor insists I bring someone to my appointment. You're the only person I know around here. My instinct was to decline, but then I realized this would finally force her to drop the act. When we arrived at the doctor's office, the nurse asked me to exit the room and led me down the hall where the doctor was waiting. Sarah, I wanted to speak with you alone. Deborah has been under my care, and I've asked her to bring in a family member several times. She believes that she is pregnant, and we need help handling this. What she needs is some psychiatric help, and for someone to tell her to stop stuffing her shirt to fake being pregnant. The thing is, Sarah, she is not faking that part. It does appear her husband's death may have sparked some type of psychosis, but her abdomen truly is the size of a third-term pregnancy. He paused. It's fluid buildup. From stage 4 ovarian cancer. She has less than 6 months to live. Stories number 10. My best friend told me she was having a baby. It wasn't good news. I almost couldn't believe it. Monica was finally expecting a child. I should have been happy for her. Instead, as she rattled off trendy baby names and plans for her dream nursery, I had to bite my tongue. Monica and I had been best friends for years, ever since we met at grief counseling. My husband had left me after 5 fruitless years of trying for a baby. She'd lost her fiancé in a motorcycle accident, and miscarried from the stress. The doctors had warned her against trying again. We found common ground in our pain. 2 would-be mothers, bonded by children who were never meant to be. But that was before Fertilex. Fertilex Incorporated revolutionized family planning. Their fertility clinics guaranteed delivery of a healthy baby, even for women told they could never conceive, with no risk. When news of their success spread across the country, it seemed like a dream come true. There was only one problem. They catered to the rich. A Fertilex treatment cost more than I earned in a year. When Monica told me over coffee that she'd made an appointment, I was sure she was joking. How? I chuckled incredulously. Did you win the lottery? She just smiled and flashed her engagement ring, a gleaming rock the size of an almond. My new man. I don't want to brag, but he's loaded. She sipped her latte. And he wants this little miracle as much as I do. We hugged. We laughed. She'd finally done it. I cried myself to sleep that night. Things only got worse as the weeks wore on. Monica was at my apartment every day, always bubbling about her perfect life. While I was stuck working doubles, she got to quit her job. While she shopped for designer cribs, I silently wept for a child I'd never have. Things came to a head one evening as she gushed about Fertilex over a glass of wine. Maybe one day, she said, with a smug squeeze of my hand, they'll offer services for less fortunate women. I couldn't even look at her. The one person who could understand the pain I felt now threw her joy in my face, joy she didn't deserve. Maybe if she'd cared about my life, she'd have asked about my new job. I pushed a mop through the laboratory of the local Fertilex clinic. The security cameras were always turned off during the night shift. I passed bank upon bank of hissing machinery, scouring each one until I finally found it. Monica's baby, gestational age 11 weeks. Vitals were stable and strong. It wriggled, asleep in its plastic womb. As I slotted a syringe into the nutrient reserve tank, I told myself that she asked for this. I sank the plunger, injecting Monica's miracle with a cocktail of whiskey and thalidomide. In a few months, Monica's joy would turn to ash in her mouth. Maybe then she'd finally remember what brought us together in the first place. Grief. Stories number 11. I decided it was time for my boyfriend to meet my parents. "Why are you going this way?" my boyfriend, Harrison, asked when I turned on the blinker and started to veer onto the exit ramp. "Because it's faster than taking the interstate," I explained. "I always go this way." The two of us were on the way to see my parents. After dating for a year, I figured it was time for him to meet my family. Harrison looked out the window at the road sign telling us which town we were traveling towards. "Grove Hill." He sounded worried. "Isn't that the place all those teenagers were killed?" he asked. "I think so," I agreed. "I don't remember. It happened so long ago. I think we should get back on the interstate," he said. "I don't care if it takes longer." "You're not scared, are you?" I looked over at him. "No," he replied a little too quickly. "You are," I teased, "but you don't have to be." I tried to placate him. "We're not going anywhere near Grove Hill." "That's a relief," he sighed. We drove on in silence for 15 miles or so before Harrison started speaking again. "You know they never caught the killer," he said. Before I could reply, Harrison suddenly reached over and grabbed the steering wheel while shouting. "Look out," he yelled. I had looked over at him when he started talking to me and missed the nail-studded boards that spanned the dark country road. Harrison tried to yank the car to the side of the road so I would drive around them, but he wasn't fast enough. I thumped over the board and immediately heard all 4 of my tires pop. I hit the brakes and brought the car to a screeching halt. "I knew we shouldn't have come this way," Harrison whined. I followed his gaze to where a large scruffy-looking man wearing dirty overalls stepped out into the middle of the road, blocking our path. In his hands was a chainsaw. "Back up! Back up! Back up!" Harrison yelled, but I ignored him. Instead, I turned off the car and opened my door. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed. "Calm down," I said. "I know him." "You what?" "Hey, Cousin Lee," I raised my hand in greeting. "I see you got my message." He nodded, acknowledging my comment. "Is that him?" He gestured at Harrison with the chainsaw. "Yep," I smiled, "that's the guy who cheated on me." When Harrison heard what I said, he threw open his car door and started running down the road away from us. He didn't get very far before a middle-aged woman in a dirty sundress stepped out into his path and pointed a shotgun at him. "Hi, Aunt Linda," I waved to the woman. "Make sure you don't kill him. Mom and Dad want to have a word with him first." Stories number 12. Mom didn't react well when my sister was taken. "Please tell me what you can remember." The officer set a hot cup of tea down in front of me, his best attempt at a comforting gesture. It happened so fast. My sister and I were walking home from our track meet. We took the shortcut through the alley, and some guy sped up in his car and grabbed her. He shoved her in the back seat and tried to grab me too, but I managed to fight him off. He took my phone, so I ran here as fast as I could. He let me continue. "Her name is Allison. Allison Lewis." "My name is Jesse Lewis." "I probably already told you that." He nodded. "Do you remember the license plates?" "Not exactly, but I think it started with a 5 and ended with a 7, and it I think was out of state, possibly Washington." "Sorry, I wish I remembered more." "It's okay, that'll certainly help us start, and you may remember more in the future." "Can I call my mom?" "We have an officer headed to your house now, but yes, please feel free to contact her. You can use my phone." I finished giving my statement and recited my mom's number to Officer Brown as he typed it into his phone and put it on speaker. Mom. Before she could answer, I burst into tears. Officer Brown looked at me sympathetically and took over the call. Mary? This is Officer Brown from the Clark County Police Department. I have some upsetting news. We have officers on the way to your home. We'd like to escort you to the precinct to discuss it. What's wrong? What happened? I nodded for him to continue. Your daughter, she was abducted while walking home. The panic in her voice grew. Is it Jessie? Did they take Jessie? Jessie is here with us. She managed to escape, but they took Allison. The panic in her voice quickly dissipated. Oh. Okay. Officer Brown looked at the phone quizzically, as if taken aback by her sudden lack of concern. Jessie, can you hear me, dear? I'll be right over, sweetie. You poor thing. Mom is coming. Please hurry, I choked out. I was also disgusted with my mom's reaction, but I was used to it. Despite us being identical twins, Mom always had a favorite. Jessie was her cherished daughter, and I was the disposable one. Annoying Allison, is what she liked to call me. 256 ATL, Oregon plates. I remembered it just fine. But I needed to steer the police in the wrong direction so I could come up with a plan. If enough time passes, Mom can stop pretending like she cares. Anyway, I don't know how I am going to keep up this act, but I have to. This is the only way my mom will finally love me. Stories number 13. She's already burning. What's one more match? Everyone watches as I place my match near the edge of the pyre. I tell myself, as she screams, that my actions are justified. If I protest, they will simply toss me in the fire too. With her. My wife. The seventh which our town has brought to light. The seventh victim they will burn alive. Do not think me one of these zealots. These spineless cowards. I keep my silence out of strategy. As the flames reach my wife's legs, searing her skin, I find her accuser in the hysteric crowd. The stupid girl. Grinning smugly as my wife finally passes out from the pain. She thinks she is untouchable. That the whole town now bends to her. She is wrong. For the woman hanging limp on the stake, engulfed in flames, is not my wife. I arranged for her escape from the town jail last night, then replaced her with a different prisoner. A woman caught unawares, walking the streets late at night. An unfortunate case of mistaken identity, concealed by a few strong blows to the face. Do I feel damned for letting an innocent woman burn in place of my wife? No. As the cruel girl said herself, those who do the devil's bidding must be swiftly punished, but you would think, someone like her, so skilled at identifying witches, would have been able to recognize the sound of her own mother's screams. Stories number 14. Ask me no questions. I'll tell you no lies. Interview, December 12, 2010. I don't want to be here. Please let me leave. This interview is being recorded. I am DC Jim Garvey at Donnybrook Garda Station. What's your full name? I don't have one. You don't have a name? No. Okay, you were found in a room with 4 victims. Were they friends of yours? No. Then why were they with you in that attic? To ask questions. Questions. Alright, give me an example. Suspect neglects to respond. Why did that stump you? You made a statement. You didn't ask. Jesus, fine. Can I have an example of these questions they asked you? Then what is there? What sort of question is that? The last one they asked before. They wound up dead. Suspect neglects to respond. Why did they come to ask you questions? Because I would answer. About what? About anything. Please sir, I wasn't responsible for what happened. I would like to leave. What do you mean, about anything? They would ask me questions about anything and I'd answer them. Why? Because I have to. Well, this interview would be a lot smoother if that were true. Suspect neglects to respond. So what? You're a guru. The Oracle of Delphi, are ya? No. Well, you couldn't tell me next week's lotto numbers, could ya? 18, 20, 32, 33, 35, 44, 15. Funny. So these visitors. They were killed. Do you know who by? They killed themselves. Why? In response to my answer. Okay, right, let's be clear now. What did they ask you? What's my name? Where is my daughter living now? Will my business succeed? Why not? How can I? Wait, so you just live in an attic and invite people to ask you stuff? I invited no one. They found me. Okay, so if I asked their names, you'd have to tell me. Suspect neglects to respond. Jesus. What? Were their names? John Patrick, Lena Shaw, Brian Murray, George Castor. So you did know them? Not until you asked. Please, just let. Okay, clever clogs, so if I asked you my, wife's name, you'd say, Jane Garvey. Please, let me go. I'm thinking of a playing card. What is it? 4 of diamonds. What's the next one I'm thinking of? Ace of clubs. I'm thinking of 3 different cards. What are they? 7 of spades. 9 of hearts. Draw 4. D.C. Garvey stands up. Is this a trick? No. Please let me leave, D.C. Garvey. D.C. Garvey takes a seat. What was my imaginary friend called? Walter. I lost a box of photos. Where is it? Above the boiler in your father's house. Please. Who kidnapped Mara Connie 3 years ago? Her stepmother. 10 seconds, silence. Did she die peacefully? Yes. Please, D.C. Garvey, will I see her again? In a sense. So there's really a heaven? No. 5 seconds, silence. Then what is there? Stories number 15. I surprised my husband by making dinner. He didn't like it as much as I did. Did you do something different to the stew this time? My husband, Earl, asked. Why? I replied, does it taste bad? Earl dipped his spoon into the stew, filled it, and then took a bite, letting the meat and vegetables linger in his mouth so he could better assess the flavor before swallowing it. No, it doesn't taste bad, he finally said, it just tastes different but in a good way. I like it, he admitted. Well, I decided to tell him the truth. I did add a secret ingredient this time. Whatever it was, I think you should keep adding it. Earl took another bite of stew. I'm afraid that won't be possible, I revealed. Why not? Because I've already used all that I had. Can't you buy more? He asked, shoveling more stew into his mouth. Not of this. How come? Did the store sell out of it? He tried to guess the reason why. This isn't something you buy from the store, I explained. What is it? I smiled. It's jasmine. When Earl heard my reply, he spat out the chunk of meat he'd been chewing and started gagging. Jasmine was the name of his mistress. Stories number 16. My husband didn't believe me when I told him our house was haunted. Did you move my keys? My husband, Justin, asked. No, I replied. Why would I move your keys? Because they're not in the basket, he gestured. In the foyer of our house was a small wicker basket sitting on an accent table. Whenever we'd come home, we'd toss our keys into the basket so we'd always know where they were. Justin was about to leave for work when he discovered that his keys weren't in the basket where they should be. Did you check the pants you wore yesterday? It was more a suggestion than a question. I didn't leave them in my pants, he snapped. I put them right here when I got home last night. He jabbed his finger at the basket. Well, I don't know what to tell you, I replied. Maybe Justin cut me off before I could finish what I was going to say. Don't you dare say ghost. He moved his finger so it was pointing at me. This house is not haunted. Before we moved into the house, I was a skeptic when it came to the existence of ghosts. Now, I was starting to believe they might be real. I couldn't come up with any other explanation for why things, like Justin's keys, would go missing and then turn up in unexpected places, or why I would leave a room and return to find the lights on when I know I turned them off or the doors open when I know I shut them behind me. I knew better than to challenge his point of view on the subject, so I just kept my mouth shut. I guess I'll just have to take your car, Justin huffed as he snatched my keys out of the basket. I need my car, I said, I have to go to work too. You can take my car, he replied, if you can find my keys. You know I don't feel comfortable driving your truck, I said. That's not my problem. He turned and headed for the door. Mad, I lunged for his hands and tried to grab my keys. Find your own keys, I said. What happened next shocked me. When my hand closed around Justin's, he whirled around and raised his arm in a motion that could only be interpreted one way. He was going to slap me, but his hand never connected with my face. Before he could strike me, he was thrown backward against the wall. You bitch, he yelled, thinking I had pushed him. It wasn't me, I insisted. Let me guess, Justin sneered, it was the ghost. In response, something lifted him off the floor and pinned him to the wall. He tried to speak, but the only thing that came out of his mouth was a choking sound. When he eventually dropped my keys, I grabbed them and ran from the house. Stories number 17. My son began to lose his shadow. I finally found out why. My son wouldn't even look at me. I thought I'd done better preparing Tommy for the big move. I'd explained that he wouldn't get to see his friends at school anymore. But after we unpacked his things and settled into the new house, he didn't speak to me for a week. Said I'd ruined his life. So I decided to make a peace offering. My old back issues of National Geographic. I'd kept them off limits. But he insisted he was a big boy now, and had been hounding me for them for a year. So I relented. I caught him, still awake, reading with a flashlight beneath the blankets at 3 a.m. Strangely, I could have sworn I heard him talking to someone as I opened the door. Her name is Yuki, Daddy. I pulled the covers up to my son's chin. 7 seemed a bit old for an imaginary friend, but he'd been under a lot of stress. Where's she from? She says she's from far away. She was hiding inside one of your magazines. Is Yuki nice? I asked. He nodded. She talks to me when you go to bed. She asks lots of questions. Especially about my shadow. He seemed casual. As if this was just another friend. But something about the whole thing made my skin crawl. I decided to play along, assuming he'd forget about Yuki and move on. But he didn't. Yuki became his constant companion. I'd hear him talking through the walls most every night. And as strange as it sounds, Tommy's shadow seemed to be fading. It was as if the sunlight was simply shining through him. I thought I needed new glasses. Until Tommy got sick. He began losing weight at an alarming rate. Nearly 20 pounds in less than a month. Doctors were baffled. His blood work was clean. All scans and tests were negative. He was simply wasting away, and no one knew why. When I took him outside for fresh air and sunshine, his shadow hardly cast a mark across the ground. I thought I was losing my mind. And all the while, Yuki was still there. She needs my shadow, Daddy, he said, his cheekbone straining his wan little face. She says it will fix her. I wanted to scream, but bit my tongue. Talking about Yuki comforted him. What happened to her? Bad men made her go away in a flash of light. But if she gets a new shadow, she'll be all better again. He deteriorated quickly. Another week and his skin began flaking off. I sat with him in the hospital, helping him weekly turn the pages of a National Geographic. On an article about the bombing of Hiroshima, he stopped. He lifted a trembling finger to a picture on the page, a shadow baked into a wall. Some poor civilian caught by the bomb. His skeletal arm cast no shade on the hospital bedsheets. His voice was barely a whisper. Yuki, almost, home. Stories number 18. My brother wants me to give him my inheritance. My older brother, Aaron, texted me today. First time I had heard from him in 15 years. I was hoping for a, hey, long time, how have you been? Instead the message I received said, I know Dad left you everything in the will. I want my share. Our dad hadn't even been buried yet and Aaron was already trying to plunder my inheritance. That's rich coming from you, considering you abandoned us. I texted back. Oh please, he responded, you and Dad were happy to be rid of me. Where do I even begin? When Aaron turned 18 he packed his things and left. No warning, no explanation. I was only 12 years old. I tried calling him, texting him, I even called his friends to see if any of them knew how I could get in touch with them. After weeks of trying I got a single sentence out of him. I can't be what he wants me to be. Our father wanted us to join the family business, but following in Dad's footsteps required a certain amount of, how do I put this nicely, brains. My older brother, for all his charms, was dumber than a rock. A trait it appears he never outgrew. Dad and I kept in touch. He texted, I bet you didn't know. Dad and I talked every day and he never once mentioned you. He said he was gonna change his will to include me, but he died before he could. I very much doubt that. I laughed as I texted him. I can prove it. Aaron sent me screenshots of texts between him and a contact titled Father. They talked about letting bygones be bygones, how Dad was sorry he didn't try harder to bring Aaron back to our family, and how much they respected each other. It ended with them both agreeing that Aaron was entitled to half of Dad's inheritance. What a fucking joke. Those could be doctored, or faked entirely, I texted. You can believe whatever you want. But the fact remains that I'm his firstborn son. I'm his oldest child. And I'm entitled to half. Maybe even more, actually. Half of what? You don't even know what was in the will. I'm sure he gave you the house, and all his creepy shit down in the basement. Keep it. I don't want it. All I need is some spending money. You owe me that much. It's what Dad would have wanted. I walked down to the basement and looked at everything my dad had left me, his entire laboratory. There's no way my brother was getting anything from me. Why don't I ask him? I texted. What the hell are you talking about? I'll ask Dad if that's what he would have wanted, and then I'll get back to you. I turned my phone off and picked up my dad's lifework, My Inheritance, a small journal of notes on the methodology of bringing a corpse back to life. Stories number 19. For my 10th birthday, my dad surprised me with 2 real-life mermaids. I've always loved mermaids. Initially, Dad wasn't my favorite person. After he left Mom, he'd only send me mermaid figures. I ignored him until my 10th birthday, when he insisted on a birthday surprise. Dad lived by the sea, so I rode my bike to his beach house. Mom didn't like his new girlfriend. Apparently, Elle smelled like fish. I'm in the basement, Sadie. I was sure my mermaid obsession came from Dad. Dad, an architect, had designed his house like an aquarium, the walls like fish tanks, glass floors mimicking the deep ocean, filled with tiny flounders. I wasn't expecting much. The last time I was there, the basement was closed for renovations. This time, I stepped into dull blue light, like walking directly into the ocean itself. Dad stood in front of a tank, grinning beneath a banner saying, "Happy 10th birthday. Now, sweetie, this is between you and me, all right?" he whispered. I could barely register his words, my gaze glued to the glass. "I have friends with money," he said. "They do marine research, and they found them." Something warm expanded in my chest when a face appeared behind the glass, a beautiful girl with long blonde hair, and a blue tail, tiny points in her ears and strange rugged skin. Gills, I thought, dizzily. I jumped back, frightened, but exhilarated. She was so pretty, graceful, gently tapping on the glass. Behind her, a boy swam into view, dark brown hair billowing around him. The scar on his throat made me wonder if a fish had attacked him. He wasn't smiling, instead folding his arms, refusing to meet my gaze. I named them Fryerin and Phelan, and I visited every weekend, talking to them through the glass. When Phelan started to talk back, though, I didn't like it. "Graflarsches." Phelan squeezed out, stabbing at his throat. He was always on the surface, leaning against the side, gasping for air, like he couldn't breathe. Mermaid speak was hard to understand. I giggled. "We can get you a bigger tank." He rolled his eyes, and Fryerin nudged him. She pointed upwards. "You want me to open the tank?" I asked. Dad stopped me. "They're pretty, but dangerous, Sadie." Growing up, I lost interest. 14, searching for my cheer pom-poms, I rummaged through a box in the basement. Deep under holiday decorations, I found a yellow dress, sandals, and cargo shorts. The red smears staining the clothing sent me stumbling back, dropping the dress and baseball cap. There were college ID tags. Fryerin and Phelan. Their real names were Quinn Cartwright and Matthew Whittam. An icy shiver slithered down my spine. When I twisted around, Fryerin's face was pressed against the glass, her eyes wide. She pointed at her throat, choking on an explosion of bubbles. "Sadie!" Dad yelled from upstairs, followed by muffled screaming. The wet sound of a tail being violently dragged down the stairs. "We've caught another one." Stories number 20. My wife was turned into a vampire. I poured myself a second cup of coffee. The microwave said 5:45 p.m., which meant 30 more minutes of sunlight. "Good morning, Tessa." My wife wrapped her arms around me from behind. She was cold to the touch, but her skin was as soft as ever. "What are you doing up, Beth? The sun doesn't set for 30 minutes. I missed you. Besides, all the windows are painted black." "I'll be fine." She had barely finished her sentence when I heard a crash, and then a sound like bacon frying. Someone threw a rock through our window, and the sunlight poured in, burning Bethany. She had to sprint out of the room. "Are you okay, Beth? I'm already healing." It just startled me. I looked out the broken window and saw a group of protesters with picket signs. "Vampires offend God. Dead should stay dead. Repent or burn in hell." Our house was the only one on the block with blackened windows. It was obvious a vampire lived here. "Beth, go back to your coffin until the sun sets. I'm gonna talk to our guests. Be careful." I walked down the driveway to the protesters and said, "Y'all need to leave. The sidewalk is public property." The leader of the protesters stepped forward, a mean-looking man with no chin, just a long neck that went right up to his bulbous, buzzed head. "Besides, we're here to help you. Vampires are an affront to God." "Adrenocortical carcinoma," I interrupted his preaching. "Excuse me," the bulbous man said. "Cancer of the adrenal glands. Stage 4. Terminal." Becoming a vampire saved her life, but you could care less about that, right? "My sweet child, I know it's hard to understand, but God gave your sister cancer because he wanted her dead." I couldn't help but laugh. "Sister? That's my wife, you idiot." He breathed in deep and spat in my face. "The only thing worse than a vampire fucker is a gay vampire fucker." "Okay," I said, wiping away his disgusting spit, "I'm calling the police." Before I could get my phone out, something hit me in the head from behind. I woke up staring up at the moon. My head was in Bethany's lap, and her wrist was in my mouth. Something cold and metallic was on my tongue, but it tasted sweet like melted ice cream. "Are you okay?" Bethany pulled back her bloody wrist, and when I closed my mouth I accidentally bit my lip. "Ow," I said, running my tongue across my teeth. "Fangs." I had fangs now. "Baby, what did you do?" I asked. "Your skull was split, it was the only way I could think to save you." "You're not mad, are you?" "Not at you. Never at you." "You're probably hungry," Bethany said. "I've got some donated blood in the fridge." I couldn't stop thinking about the protesters. What monsters they were. How badly I wanted to take them out. How about instead we get some takeout? Stories number 21. My wife and I decided to visit a funeral museum. It was great until we got to the gift shop. "That's disgusting," my wife, Jennifer, pointed at the display. It depicted a tribe of people eating one of their own. According to the description, the tribe depicted believed that consuming the dead was a sign of love and respect. The display was part of the Funerals Around the World exhibit at the funeral museum we decided to visit after finding the brochure for it in the lobby of our hotel. "I don't know," I eyed her, "you look pretty tasty. I might have to take a bite out of you when you die." "Ugh," she groaned, "why do you have to be so gross? I thought that's why you married me." "I married you for your money," Jennifer smiled. "If you weren't rich, your gross ass would be single." I clutched my chest, feigning that she'd mortally wounded me with her comment. That would be ironic, she said. What would? You dying in a funeral museum. That would be weird, I agreed. Come on, Jennifer started walking towards the next exhibit, let's keep moving. We walked through the remaining exhibits, talking about the various gruesome funeral rites on display until we reached the gift shop. Do you want a souvenir? I gestured at the shelves of funeral-themed merchandise laid out before us. I don't think so. Can I interest you in a personalized photo? The pale man behind the counter asked. He was clearly dressed up to look like a funeral director. I walked up to the counter and looked at the two macabre photos he had lying on the counter, one of me, and one of my wife. The photos showed a close-up of each of us lying in a coffin. I don't look that old, do I? Jennifer asked. In the photo, she looked about 15 to 20 years older than she did now. So did I. How did you make these? I asked. We have special cameras throughout the facility, the man replied. It looks like they use some kind of filter, Jennifer said, like they do on TikTok. How much are they? They're free with admission. He slid the photos over to me. Cool, thanks. I picked them up and started walking away. Why would you want those? Jennifer sneered, they're so morbid. I ignored her and examined the photos. Look, they have dates on the back. I pointed. I wonder what they're for. The dates, which were 17 years in the future, were the same on each photo. When I turned around to ask the man about them, he was gone. Standing in his place was a young woman. Excuse me, I said, do you know what these dates mean? I pointed to the backs of the photos. No, she replied, you should ask whoever gave them to you. That other guy who works here gave them to us, I said. What guy? She asked. I described him. Nobody like that works here, she replied, and we don't give out morbid death photos like those.